The law office was stifling that August afternoon as the family gathered for Grandpa Joe's will reading. I sat alone in the back row while my brother Scott and his wife Vanessa claimed front row seats beside our cousin Melissa. Scott kept checking his watch, clearly eager to hear the financial details and be done with the formalities. I'd spent the last decade caring for Grandpa after his stroke. I'd left my promising architecture career in Chicago to move back to our small Wisconsin hometown, settling into the guest room of his Victorian house in town while we rented out the old family farm 30 minutes away. Scott called twice a year from his luxurious Boston condo, always too busy with his investment banking career to visit. Mr. Patterson, Grandpa's attorney for 40 years, adjusted his reading glasses and began, to my grandson Scott James Wheeler, I leave my investment portfolio valued at approximately $2 million. And my Victorian home on Maple Street. Scott's face lit up as he squeezed Vanessa's hand. She leaned over to whisper something that made them both chuckle. I felt a pang of hurt but pushed it aside. Money had always motivated Scott more than sentiment. To my grandson Daniel Thomas Wheeler, Mr. Patterson continued, looking at me over his glasses, I leave my 180-acre farmland on County Road 8, including all structures and contents therein. There was a moment of silence before Scott burst into laughter. The farm? That's rich? He turned to face me. Congratulations, little brother. You get Grandpa's worthless old farm while I get $2 million and a fully renovated Victorian. Vanessa didn't bother hiding her amusement. What will you even do with it, Daniel? Play farmer? It's been abandoned for years. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with their reaction. If I may continue, Joseph also left a personal letter for Daniel. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. I tucked it into my jacket pocket, unwilling to share whatever final words Grandpa had written while my brother was still snickering. I can sell you the Victorian at a family discount, Scott offered magnanimously as we left the office. Though I'll probably list it next week, the market's hot right now. I've been living there for 10 years, I reminded him quietly, but thanks for the offer. Scott shrugged. Business is business. I need to maximize my inheritance. He checked his phone. Our flight leaves in 3 hours. Let me know if you need help clearing out your stuff. They were gone the next day, back to their busy lives with barely a backward glance at the hometown they'd escaped or the grandfather we just buried. Alone that evening, I finally opened Grandpa's letter on the porch swing where we'd spent countless evenings watching the sunset. My dear Daniel, by now you know that I've left you the family farm and given Scott the house and investments. This might seem unfair at first glance. I know the farm looks run down and the fields haven't been worked in years. But you, of all people, will understand why this land matters. Remember those summer afternoons when I'd take you out to the North Ridge and we'd sketch the rolling hills? You'd always talk about how you'd design a house that followed the natural contours of the land, that respected what was already there instead of bulldozing it into submission. You have your grandmother's heart and my father's vision. Scott has always chased dollars. I've given him what he values most, and I've given you what I believe will truly serve your soul. There's more to that land than meets the eye. The farm isn't worthless, far from it. But its true value will only be apparent to someone who takes the time to really see it. I'm trusting you to make the right choices, whatever they may be. With love and faith in you, Grandpa Joe. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring my vision. It was so like Grandpa, cryptic yet heartfelt, hinting at something more without spelling it out. The next day, I drove out to the farm for the first time in months. The old 2-story farmhouse stood weathered but dignified against the horizon. The barn leaned slightly, its red paint faded to a rusty pink. Fields that had once grown corn and soybeans were now wild meadows dotted with late summer wildflowers. I used the old key from under the porch step to unlock the farmhouse door. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through wavy glass windows. The furniture was draped with sheets, preserved like ghostly sculptures. For the next week, I split my time between emptying Grandpa's Victorian home before Scott could sell it and exploring the farm. I discovered Grandpa had kept detailed records of the property, surveys, soil samples, tax assessments, all neatly filed in the farm office. Nothing seemed particularly revelatory, though. Just normal documentation for a struggling family farm. By the end of August, I had moved my belongings to the farmhouse, cleaned it thoroughly, and begun basic repairs. My savings wouldn't allow for major renovations, but I could at least make it livable. I set up my drafting table in the sunroom overlooking the eastern meadow and began freelancing again, taking on small architectural projects while I figured out my next move. Then came the letter that changed everything. It arrived on a crisp September morning, the Hillcrest Development logo embossed on heavy cream stationery. I opened it at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside me as I read. Dear Mr. Wheeler, we at Hillcrest Development Corporation were saddened to learn of Joseph Wheeler's passing. Please accept our condolences. As you may be aware, our company has been developing luxury residential communities throughout the Midwest. Our Prairie Ridge project in neighboring Jefferson County has been tremendously successful, with homes selling in the $2.5 million range. We've had our eye on the Wheeler Farm property for some time due to its unique topographical features and proximity to Lake Miller. Initial surveys indicate the property would be ideal for our next premium development. We would like to offer $28 million for the full 180-acre parcel. This offer is significantly above market value for agricultural land in the area because we recognize the property's development potential. Our offer stands for 60 days. We've included our standard purchase agreement for your review. Sincerely, Richard Colton, CEO, Hillcrest Development Corporation. I read the letter 3 times, certain I'd misunderstood. $28 million? For Grandpa's worthless farm? Suddenly, pieces began falling into place. The county's announcement last year about extending water and sewer lines along County Road 8. The new highway interchange breaking ground 10 miles away. Grandpa's meticulous collection of geological surveys showing the farm's stable bedrock, perfect for building foundations. He'd known. Somehow, my 86-year-old grandfather had anticipated this development company's interests long before they made their move. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Scott's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. Daniel, how's farm life treating you? His voice dripped with condescension. It's going well, actually, making progress on repairs. Listen, I'm calling with some news. Melissa mentioned she saw someone from Hillcrest Development at Patterson's office asking about the farm. They're that luxury home developer, right? Maybe they want to buy that worthless land off your hands. My heart raced. Scott didn't know about the offer yet. Maybe, I said noncommittally. I'll look into it. You should jump on it if they offer anything over $100,000, Scott advised. Cut your losses. That place is just a money pit. After we hung up, I sat for a long time at Grandpa's old kitchen table, thinking, $28 million would set me up for life. I could design buildings around the world, never worry about money again. But I kept returning to Grandpa's letter. I'm trusting you to make the right choices, whatever they may be. What was the right choice here? The next morning, I drove into town and visited the county records office. The clerk helped me pull the property maps for the surrounding area, and I began to understand the bigger picture. The farm wasn't just random acreage, it was a crucial piece in Hillcrest's development puzzle. They'd already quietly purchased adjacent properties, but my farm was the centerpiece, with its rolling hills, mature woodlands, and half-mile of lake frontage. I spent the following week researching Hillcrest Development. Their luxury communities or ecological disasters. Hillsides terraced into submission. Wetlands filled, old-growth trees cleared for cookie-cutter mansions with 6-car garages. They marketed exclusive living while destroying the very natural beauty that made the land special in the first place. Is that what Grandpa wanted for our family land? The farm where 4 generations of Wheelers had worked the soil, where I'd learned to fish in the creek, where countless species of birds nested in the ancient oak grove. I didn't think so, but rejecting $28 million outright seemed foolish. There had to be another option. That's when I remembered my original passion, the reason I'd become an architect in the first place. Sustainable design. Buildings that worked with the landscape instead of against it. Communities that preserved natural features while creating beautiful living spaces. I stayed up 3 nights straight, drafting initial concepts, running numbers, researching state environmental grants and conservation easements. By the 4th day, I had the beginnings of a plan. One that would require all my architectural skill, business acumen, and negotiating ability. I called Richard Colton's office and scheduled a meeting. The Hillcrest Development headquarters occupied the top floor of the tallest building in the nearest city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views, and modern furniture in muted grays and blues screamed wealthy restraint. Richard Colton himself was a silver-haired man with a deep tan of someone who spent weekends on golf courses. "Mr. Wheeler," he greeted me with practiced warmth. "I'm so pleased you responded to our offer. I knew your grandfather, you know. He was always very particular about that land." He was, I agreed, setting my portfolio on the conference table, "which is why I can't accept your offer as it stands." Colton's smile dimmed slightly. "I assure you, $28 million is extremely generous given the current market." "I'm not here to negotiate the price up," I clarified. "I'm here to propose an alternative arrangement." I opened my portfolio and spread out my preliminary designs, a development concept utterly unlike Hillcrest's usual projects. My plan preserved 70% of the farm as undeveloped green space, including conservation easements for the wetlands, oak grove, and wildlife corridors. The homes were clustered thoughtfully within the landscape, using sustainable materials and cutting-edge energy systems. "Wheeler Preserve," I explained. 40 luxury homes instead of your planned 120, each one unique, designed specifically for its location on the property. Shared amenities include an organic farm-to-table restaurant in the renovated barn, hiking trails through the preserved woodlands, and community gardens. Colton frowned as he examined the plans. "This limits the number of units significantly." "It does," I acknowledged. "But each home would command a higher price precisely because they're limited and unique. Your current developments offer luxury finishes but ultimately similar houses. I'm proposing true exclusivity, homes that exist nowhere else, that connect their owners to the land in meaningful ways." I laid out the financial projections, showing how fewer units at higher prices could still yield substantial profits. Additionally, the conservation easements provide significant tax benefits, and the sustainable design elements qualify for various state and federal incentives. "This is certainly different from our usual approach," Colton said carefully. "What exactly are you proposing in terms of our arrangement?" "A joint venture. Hillcrest provides the development capital and handling construction. I contribute the land and architectural designs. We split the profits accordingly. I retain creative control over the architectural and landscape design elements, while you handle the business and construction management." For the next hour, we negotiated details. Colton was skeptical at first, but increasingly intrigued as I elaborated on the concept and its financial potential. By the end of our meeting, he agreed to have his team review my proposal and reconvene in 2 weeks. I left his office cautiously optimistic. My concept preserved what made the farm special while still capitalizing on its development potential. It wasn't the easiest path. It would require years of work rather than a simple sale. But it felt right. 2 weeks stretched into 3 as Hillcrest's finance team analyzed my proposal. Finally, Colton called to schedule another meeting. "We've reviewed your concept thoroughly," he began once we were seated in the same conference room. "Initially, I'll admit I thought it was impractical idealism. But the numbers are compelling, particularly with the rising market for truly sustainable luxury homes." He slid a document across the table, a joint venture agreement that largely matched what I proposed, with some adjustments to the profit structure and timeline. "There's significant risk here," he continued. "This isn't our usual approach, but the potential rewards, both financially and for our company's image, could be substantial." I reviewed the agreement carefully. It wasn't perfect, but it preserved the core of my vision while providing the capital needed to make it happen. I signed. Wheeler Preserve broke ground 3 months later. The project would unfold in phases over 5 years, with the first homes ready within 18 months. I established my architectural office in the renovated farmhouse, overseeing every aspect of the design process. I hadn't told Scott about any of this. He called occasionally, always asking if I'd unloaded that useless farm yet, always offering unsolicited financial advice. I deflected his questions, saying only that I was exploring options. Then came the feature in Architectural Digest. The 6-page spread showcased Wheeler Preserve as a revolutionary approach to luxury development, highlighting its environmental consciousness alongside its exclusivity. My name featured prominently as both the landowner and lead architect. The article estimated the total project value at over $150 million. The day the magazine hit newsstands, Scott called. "What the hell, Daniel?" he demanded without preamble. "You're developing the farm? With Hillcrest? Why didn't you tell me?" "It never came up," I replied calmly. never came up. This is $100 million project. That worthless farm, he stopped abruptly, realization apparently dawning. Grandpa knew, didn't he? He knew what that land was worth when he left it to you. I think he knew it had potential, I said carefully, but its value depends entirely on what you do with it. Scott was silent for a moment. I want in, he finally said. As family, I deserve a piece of this. You owe me that much. I don't owe you anything, Scott. You got exactly what Grandpa intended for you, the quick cash and the Victorian house, which you immediately sold. This isn't fair, he insisted. That should have been split between us. Like you offered to split your inheritance, or how you charge me market rate to stay in the house I've been maintaining for a decade. Another silence, longer this time. Look, I continued more gently, I'm not doing this out of spite. Grandpa left us each what he thought we would value most. He was right about you. You wanted liquid assets, not a long-term project requiring vision and patience. So that's it? I'm just out of luck because Grandpa played favorites. I sighed. Come see what I'm building, Scott. If you're genuinely interested in the project rather than just a quick profit, maybe we can find a role for you. To my surprise, Scott and Vanessa flew in the following weekend. Their luxury SUV looked out of place in the farmhouse's gravel driveway as I greeted them. This is actually nice, Vanessa admitted reluctantly, looking around the renovated farmhouse. Rustic but charming. I gave them a tour of the property, showing them the preserved wetlands, the oak grove, and the sites marked out for the first phase of homes. I explained the sustainability features, the community aspects, and the careful integration of architecture and landscape. Scott was uncharacteristically quiet throughout the tour. Finally, as we stood on the north ridge overlooking the property, the same spot where Grandpa and I used to sketch, he spoke. I never saw it, he said softly. All those summers here, and I never saw what this place could be. I was always so focused on getting out, moving to the city, making my fortune. We saw different things, I acknowledged. That's not inherently wrong. But Grandpa saw what you saw. It wasn't a question. I think he saw each of us clearly, I replied. He knew you'd take the Victorian and investments and turn them into more money. And he knew I'd take this land and try to do something meaningful with it. Scott looked out over the rolling landscape now dotted with survey stakes and construction markers. I want to invest, he said finally, not as family, not as a handout. As a proper investor who believes in the project. I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of his usual angle or scheme. But for once he seemed genuine. We can discuss terms, I agreed. But understand that this isn't a quick flip. Wheeler Preserve is a long-term vision that will take years to fully realize. I'm starting to see that some things are worth the wait, Scott admitted. Over the next year, Scott did invest substantially in Wheeler Preserve, properly through legal channels with fair terms. He didn't try to take control or redirect the vision. Instead, he leveraged his financial expertise and connections to strengthen the project's economic foundation. The first homes sold quickly, commanding prices even higher than our projections. Buyers were drawn to the unique combination of luxury, sustainability, and connection to the natural landscape. The waiting list for future phases grew, and Wheeler Preserve became a case study in sustainable development. 2 years after breaking ground, I stood once again on the North Ridge with Scott beside me. The farm had transformed, no longer abandoned, but not destroyed either. Instead, it had evolved into something that honored its past while creating a new future. Grandpa would be proud, Scott said, surveying the landscape, not just of what you've built, but of how you built it. I nodded, thinking of Grandpa's letter and its gentle guidance. He gave each of us exactly what we needed, not just what we wanted. And in your case, apparently what you needed was a $150 million development project, Scott added with a laugh. The money was never the point, I reminded him. It's about creating something meaningful, something that will outlast us. As the sun set over Wheeler Preserve, casting long shadows across land that had been in our family for generations, I felt a deep sense of rightness. The farm hadn't been worthless after all. But its true value couldn't be measured in mere dollars. Its worth lay in the woodlands preserved for future generations, in the sustainable homes integrated thoughtfully into the landscape, in the community taking shape among the rolling hills. And perhaps most importantly, in the bridge rebuilt between two brothers who had seen the world so differently. Sometimes I realize the most valuable inheritance isn't what can be quickly liquidated or immediately appreciated. It's the opportunity to create something meaningful, if you have the patience to see beyond the surface and the courage to take the longer path. Grandpa had known that all along, and now finally, so did we.